Hey now, welcome to the Dirty Side of the Track, America's leading Formula One podcast. I'm Brian, that's Rob. Today is gonna be our best episode ever. Tell everyone why, Rob, if I could talk.
I was going to say no, let's keep it a secret, but given that anybody that's seen the name of the episode and seen the artwork that goes with it probably knows exactly what's happening today, so why beat around the bush? Yeah, we're going to have, we did catch up with Nate Saunders from ESPN again this week. And rather than kind of like how first time we got him on the show, it was more of us trying to interview him and kind of learn about life as a journalist in F1. This was just a good old chat, just the three of us kind of chewing the fat over what happened in 2022 and what we think we might see in 2023. So it was super cool. Kudos to Nate for joining us again. He was brilliant. So we're going to rattle through a little bit of news and social because there's not a lot that's come up really. And then we will leave you to listen to how we got on chatting to Nate.
Yeah, it was a great interview. Nate, thanks for joining us. And for the second time in 3 weeks, we heard some honest-to-goodness, amazing insight from, obviously not Rob or myself, but anyway.
But first, we have to start on the big news of the week. Get your tissues ready.
I'm ready.
Charles and Charlotte are no longer an item.
So I feel bad for both of them. I will totally, as they have asked, respect their privacy, but does this mean I have a chance? Because I'd like to go see if Charles is available.
I was just about to say, yeah. You got a little
come on,
crush
he's a
on
good
Charles.
I do. He's a good-looking dude. Speaks like 47 languages, drives for Ferrari. Come on.
Yeah, true.
Wish them well.
Speaking of Ferrari drivers, I'm going to hold my hands up and be honest here and say one that I hadn't actually heard of, but was in the news this week was Patrick Tambay passed away at the age 73. I did a bit of digging. McLaren, Ferrari and Renault driver of the late 70s and early 80s. And by all accounts, a jolly good fellow with what they called movie star good looks. So basically, Charles Leclerc of his time. Yeah,
well, obviously our condolences to his family. Sad news, but sounds like an amazing career. And speaking of amazing, Valtteri. Oh man, the video he posted in Australia. How good is the mullet? I mean, it is top notch. He wanted to be Australian. Like he thought that's a good Australian look. And then he looks at Tiffany. Is that his girlfriend's name? Why am I drawing a blank?
Yep.
And he goes, "You beauty." And in his little Australian accent he had tried. I mean, it was great. It was the best video of the week in my humble opinion.
It doesn't even need a video, to be honest. That mullet speaks for itself. Just a picture of him with that haircut. That is like... Do you reckon we'll actually see anybody inspired by the Bottas mullet?
I don't know, but
you going to try it, Brian?
No. And so, I mean, seriously, it was hilarious. Like, I don't know how he came up with the idea, but I love seeing people's personality like that. And I thought it was absolutely hilarious. As we talked about last week, though, shifting gears, the Ferrari change with Mattia putting in his resignation. We saw a whole boatload of people, different team principals and people within the team and questions on who may get promoted. I know your favorite, Rob, was the Christian Horner conversation, I believe, right?
Yeah, I think they caught up with him. What was the award show this week? It was the F1 something.
It wasn't prize giving yet.
Okay, let's just say it was the F1 Awards. So one of our listeners will correct us like they always do.
I think it was Motorsport Award, but okay.
Okay, Motorsport Awards. The F1 Motorsport Awards for the awards for the best awards.
I don't know if it's F1 though, but okay. That's what I'm saying, if it was broader. But whatever.
Anyway, two things happened at that award show, or three things in fact. One, they managed to sit Horner at a table, the table number was 44, and the internet loved that. When Horner was giving out the award for the best rookie, he announced it was Toto first of all, the mischievous imp.
I thought that was funny. I got to give Horner credit. He does have occasionally a pretty good sense of humor.
He does. And then later on, they were I don't know where this has come from, but they were grilling him about whether the speculation about him replacing Binotto at Ferrari, and he kind of very quickly distanced himself from that one. It's kind of like you could almost see the look in his eyes of just like, why? Why would I go there?
I mean, one of the leaders in the clubhouse of all the rumors, and still just rumors, Fred Vasseur from Alfa Romeo. And when Paul was on a couple episodes ago, he did talk about giving Fred some grief, about taking the Ferrari job and when it would be announced and yada, yada. I still think in my mind, he's the leader in the clubhouse of the rumors. I mean, they're a customer of Ferrari. Alfa had a great season. Thank you again to Valtteri's mullet. And, we'll find out. But I know there are others being mentioned. But again, if I had $5 in my pocket, I'd put it on Vasseur.
Yeah, there seems to be kind of Horner aside, they're like four main candidates doing the rounds, and two from outside and two from within. So, like you say, Fred's one, Andreas Seidel from McLaren. He's the other name kind of being put forward. I'm not sure if it's actively being put forward, it's just journalists needed another name to throw into the hat, so they just picked one. But then I was reading, I think it was Autosport, maybe. I was reading an article online saying, but will they do a promotion from within? And if they do, the two main kind of candidates there are the current racing director, Laurent Mekies.
Yep.
Yeah. And then there's also the head of Ferrari's Sport and GT operation, Antonello Coletta. Why did I have to take that? Why couldn't I see how you leant back from the microphone at that point?
I was reading in reverse and knew I'd let you have those.
So it'd be interesting. I don't know. I mean, Binotto doesn't actually leave until the end of the year, which I guess isn't actually that far away now. I don't know how important it is to get anybody straight in. Preseason testing doesn't start until February.
Right.
You probably want someone in before then to have worked out all the crinkles in the plan. Question. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. We'll see who they pick. It might even be somebody completely out of left field and none of those four. But
I mean, I have submitted my resume. I'm kind of waiting for a response back. I'm a little hurt. I haven't heard from Ferrari F1 HR, but
it's because they know you're coming in to stalk Charles. So I think you've just taken yourself out of the running.
And Carlos. I mean, call me. All right. So my favorite news of the week, the real news of the week, is F1 announced that, as we knew, there'd be 6 sprints in 23, but now we know where. And I'd like to kind of discuss this one with you, Rob, because some of these, like I read it quickly when it first popped, and I said, yes. And then I read it again, and I said, what? To some of them. So it's Azerbaijan, Austria, Belgium, Qatar, US, COTA, and Brazil. So I fell in love, going backwards, with Brazil, COTA, Austria, I think will be good for it, and then I'll stop talking at this point. I'd love your thoughts on the other 3, and if you agree with me on the first 3, I have some mixed feelings on the last 3.
I don't like the sprint format just yet.
Oh, so you're still not sold on it?
I'm not sold on it. Okay, we both love Brazil, but if you go back and take a look at it, really was the sprint mixed up a little bit because we had the wet quali and we got K-Mag in a pole for the sprint. I don't like the way Parc Fermé shuts down, and you can't. If you could tinker with your setup for the sprint and tinker with your setup for the race, I think that would be cool. I still would prefer the person that wins qualifying actually gets pole position for the race, because to me that's what qualifying is for. So my bizarre out there idea is that I'm not anti-sprint, I'm just anti-sprint the way the format is right now. Here's one for you. How about sprint on a Friday? Because I like something competitive on the Friday. I do like not having kind of the practice for nothing. But okay, sprint on a Friday where the running order of the sprint is just reverse grid from the previous race. We then just segue into normal quali and race weekend. Sprint doesn't influence the main event. That way, every race weekend is fair insofar as the quali leads into race in the good old traditional way. But if you like the small, shorter sprint format, then like other sprint series in other formats of motorsport, you can have just a thing of a sprint race that doesn't have to impact the main race. Discuss my crazy idea.
That's terrible. So you're telling me if we did a sprint in Brazil, which we both love Brazil, you more than me, but I thought this last 2 races there, the last 2 years were great. You're telling me you rock up to Brazil on a Friday, and based on reverse order of the last race, you said, or of the standings?
Yes, do a sprint.
Or last race?
Last race.
Okay, so you'll take, what was before that, Mexico? So you take the Mexico GP final standings and you flip it around.
Yep.
So now Max is starting in 20th?
Yes.
No, I don't like this idea.
Reverse order,
he has all the jeopardy. He has to pass everybody, and
exactly.
He could totally ruin his car right before
quali. Of course he could. And because it'll count for some points, that actually gives some of the smaller teams the chance to secure a less prestigious victory.
No.
But this sprint going into setting the grid for the race, I don't like it. I'm not sold on it.
So you're going to let Logan Sargent start first at all of these sprint races?
Yes.
And see if he can defend, possibly dangerously, to hold on to some points?
Yes, I am.
No. No one's going to risk their cars on a
Good. So
Friday.
then Sargent will
get
great. So Sargent will get a sprint win, and now you'll get two sets of stats for your SAP stats of race wins versus sprint wins. Because right now, the sprint format completely messes up all historical stats at these particular races. You can't compare a Brazil normal race to a Brazil sprint, and I just think that the sprints, other than Brazil, which by virtue of the rain was a bit mixed up anyway, just turns into a little bit of a procession, a couple of overtakes, and then it all settles itself back down again.
Overtakes, that's pretty good.
No, there was more in the race. The race itself was fantastic in Brazil, and the sprint was pretty good. But I'm not set. I don't like this. I don't like this qualifying for the race day sprint format. I think it's bobbins.
Well, I don't know what that means, but I'm going to let you take.
It's not good.
You can go take your idea and sit in the sandbox and work on it a little bit. I'll answer my own question then. So I'm low sail at Qatar. It's fine. Qatar, whatever you want. It's fine. I don't like the idea of messing up Spa with this. It's such a long track.
Messing up. So there you go. You agree sprints mess up race weekends.
I'm also not sold on sprints.
Okay.
I think 6 is too many. If you kept it at 3 and kept it at some of the tracks, and again, it's a little back weighted. If you give me Silverstone, Coda, and Brazil, I'd have been happy. I do not like it at Baku. Again, it's a long lap, and there's a lot of jeopardy. And give me tracks with easier overtaking. Where you could do this. Could you imagine if they'd given us a sprint at Paul Ricard? Oh my God, I would have
sprint at Monaco.
I would have vomited. Anyway, all right. So sorry, I am curious to see it happen. I think 6 is too many. I think 3 would have been better. I'm still trying to determine if I like it or not. But I'm at least willing to embrace more F1, whereas Rob wants to do the reverse grid. Logan Sargent wins it all.
Well, he won't win it, though, will he? But he'll be in with a chance. Whereas he won't be in with a chance in any sprint or race.
No way, because Alex will line up right next to him, and then the two of them will just drive side by side at 20 miles an hour and see if anyone can get past them. Because they're teammates.
And if they do, all the best of luck to them, and it'll give a little bit of excitement that we get. We are not going to get, unless we get some massive catch-up, we're not going to get that much up of a jumbled podium next year, right? We can pretty much probably predict with accuracy that 80%, maybe even higher than that, maybe 90% of podium next year will all be made up of Red Bull, Ferrari, and Mercedes, right? Yeah. And this at least would give you, even if it's a less prestigious sprint race, someone else could stand on the top step maybe. Yes, it's a little rough around the edges. Maybe it's not reverse order of the previous race, but I'm just going to draw a line at it. I can see a place for sprint races. I just don't like the way it's implemented.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you as well. I just don't think putting the slowest driver in the worst car at the front on a Friday makes any sense, because no one will want to.
Yeah, everyone seemed to be loving the fact that K-Mag was at the front of a sprint race.
Yeah, he earned it in quali.
He earned it because of Mother Nature and some weather.
No, he put in one lap better than everybody else.
He did, but you know what I mean is you enjoyed that. You enjoyed seeing one of the slowest cars at the front. And my suggestion of putting the slowest cars at the front, you don't like.
Okay, first of all, he wasn't Latifi. I mean, he was a middle of the pack qualifier. Second of all, you and I spoke. I was very nervous he would get dirty defending, and people would have to risk their race to overtake. That's always been my fear when an inferior car and possibly a riskier driver is at the front. So, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, moving on.
Oh, go on. You say moving on and then just point at me. That's it. You
Well, I mean, you arranged this, so why don't you tell everyone about the amazing thing that's about to happen?
I don't think I need to, because I think if we now hand over to me, as I did introduce the segment with Nate, then I can take it from there. So, over to me, Rob. Okay, well, there's a kind of a tradition in movies that sometimes the sequels aren't always better than the original. I think Terminator 2 was an example of one that was, and definitely Back to the Future definitely put in some great sequels. So trying to keep the tradition of great sequels, we would like to welcome back to the show Nate Saunders from ESPN. Hey, Nate, how you doing?
Hey, guys, I'm good. And one of my favourite movies is Empire Strikes Back, so I'm hoping that that is the same case here. But maybe not as iconic as The Empire Strikes Back, we'll have to see. But, definitely a better sequel. So, but yeah, thanks for having me back on. I'm looking forward to having a chat.
No worries. I mean, the only reason we really brought you back on is that I just really like doing that Nate Week artwork, so I wanted to roll it out again.
And I loved seeing that last time. I think last time you'd mentioned it, and then I saw it, and I was like, that's pretty cool. So I might have to steal it more next year going forward.
It is all yours. It is all yours. Yeah, thanks for joining us. So, as we were kind of talking when we were getting ready here, F1 had, I thought, an amazing season. As you look back on, now that it's closed officially on 22, what are some of your thoughts? We'll get into some questions in particular, but as you look back, do you kind of say, all right, that was great, or did it leave you wanting more? How do you look back on 22?
Well, I think it did leave me and a lot of people wanting more, but that's purely because of the nature of last season. I think it's difficult to go from a season where, last race, last lap, and controversy like we had in Abu Dhabi. So you always came into that, and I think the first few races suggested we were going to get something similar to that, didn't it, with Ferrari and Red Bull instead of Mercedes and Red Bull. So that was frustrating that kind of fell off. But I think that it felt a lot more like some of the Formula One seasons of old, some of the Hamilton years, some of the Schumacher years, certainly 2 of the Vettel seasons. It felt more like that. And I think there's a different way of appreciating those seasons. It doesn't go to the final race. It's not wheel to wheel every week. But what you had was a team and driver so well in sync with each other that you're like, okay, this is impressive from a different perspective. Last year we had Lewis and Max going at it all year. Who's going to win right to the wire? I felt from about July onwards, it was like, as soon as Charles Leclerc spun out in France, I was like, I think Max has won the title now. So you kind of knew there was that inevitability about it, but Max kind of was raising the bar so much that even if maybe it took some of the sting out of the championship, I still was pretty impressed with just how good he was, and a lot of things, the team orders thing and the budget cap maybe distracted people from it. But, when you boil it down to the end of the season, Max was still so good. So still enjoyed it. I would say if I was comparing the seasons, I would say last year I preferred to this season. But that's, again, because of what happened. But I think there were still some great moments this year. We had some great races, some great victories from different drivers. A lot of talking points as well. So I think that's 2021 was so good. It's important that people don't just be like, well, every season's got to be like that. It's not going to be the case. So you've got to step back from that a bit, don't you?
Yeah, agree. And we started I don't know when it was, midway through, maybe even towards the tail end of the season, we started trying to push out a weekly blog. And one of the weeks I did a kind of a bit of a deep dive into Adrian Newey, who I knew of and obviously knew a fair bit about him, but kind of until I started really burrowing into it, I didn't realise that he'd got such a big background with ground effect cars back in the late 70s and early 80s. Now, how much do you think the new regs played into kind of that skill set from, say, Red Bull, that they could design a car, to me, the bozo from the outside looking in, they seem to just nail the regs right from the beginning, so they could spend all their development on making it even better, whereas everyone else seemed to get caught out by the dreaded porpoising, and they seem to have had to spend a lot of their early seasons sort of scrambling to go, how do we get rid of this? How do we get rid of this?
Yeah, it did feel like a classic season where one concept won out over the rest. I think you're right. One of the things that was talked about in the years leading up to this year was that the new rules were going to put the onus completely back towards the car. There's a lot of years when Red Bull felt that there was too much emphasis on how good your engine was. And obviously, Red Bull's engine for a long time wasn't up there. Funnily enough, though, Red Bull's engine department, the Honda engine they had, was actually pretty good this year as well. So I think that what they did was they looked at what Mercedes had done, how they'd dominated the last regs, and they realized, right, we're going to, after 21, we're going to have to bring this engine department together without Honda's kind of, branding on it. And it seems like all the teams, with COVID, basically got an extra year kind of, to draw things out, etc. So I think that Red Bull's skill set has always been on that car side. And what the rules did, you basically, you could lay out a blank piece of paper in Adrian Newey's office or, the design team's office and say, right, build us a car that's going to beat Mercedes. And Red Bull's always been very good at doing that. I think in 18, 19 especially, and 20, they felt that they had a better car than Mercedes, but they just felt like, well, the engine is just such an important thing. So that's been pulled back a bit. So yeah, I agree. And I think that is ultimately what people want to see, isn't it? You don't want it just to be defined by, well, this team has the best engine, so they're going to win. I'm not saying Mercedes did either. They did a great job through that time. But yeah, this definitely felt like, I think Newey came alive over the past few years, knowing that this thing was on the horizon. If there hadn't been this big rule change, it might have been like, he's going to go off and do something else. So yeah, people at Red Bull have suggested similar.
I mean, you're probably not wrong though on the engine aspect. You remember when Lewis took the penalty in Brazil 21 and and started at the back because of the penalty on his wing and just kept driving around and lapping people, and it was wild. It was almost like an engine undercut situation that he pulled for the race. But,
yeah, I think he described it as having a rocket ship that day as well.
Yeah.
Even he said, he was like, yeah, it was crazy how fast that was.
I mean, it was fun to watch in 21 because of how strange it was. And then this year, I thought the entire Brazil weekend was tremendous. Even
Yeah,
when they put Charles out on inters and quali, it was still, other than that, it was still great.
Yeah, Ferrari was still making it entertaining, even though they weren't champions at the end. I think I'm trying to remember. Maybe my brain is cloudy because it's the most recent one, but Brazil was probably my favorite race of the year. I don't know if you guys had any that stood out further, but it was actually a great advert for the sprint weekend format. I thought as well, because you had that. The race was set up nicely by the sprint race. But I also thought, interestingly, sorry, this is me just going on a random, dragging your show onto a random tangent as well.
Go for it.
It showed the good and bad of sprint weekends. Great race, great weekend. But it was gutting that Kevin Magnussen started a race that he got pole position on.
Right.
8th.
Yeah.
On the Sunday.
I agree.
So it was a really interesting kind of dynamic there, but still a great race. And I don't think we had enough of those great races in 22 compared to 21.
We actually
going back to the comparison.
I'd be curious, what else did you think? So we talked about Brazil a lot. Rob said it was one of his favorite tracks going into the weekend, and I thought that might have been, he put it at or above Spa, which is my favorite. And so we debated that going into Brazil. And then with that weekend, it was tremendous. I mean, the whole weekend was, like you said, great advertising for the sprint format. I was presently surprised that K-Mag battled beautifully during the sprint. He didn't get his elbows out too crazy, but he also, defended as best he could in that thing, in the Haas, and he did an amazing job. I thought didn't put a foot wrong, but I actually put Silverstone up there as one of the weekends I love. The last 15 laps, I still show non-F1 fans as the battles at the front, 2 through 5, right. And then Fernando was poking his nose in, and I think the FIA named it Action of the Year with this one.
Through goes Hamilton!
That was like a great moment. But that
it just popped into my head. I was about to say the through goes Hamilton moment, which was amazing.
And it wasn't even that. It was those 10 laps of them switching positions and on and off the track. And it was just like I literally was standing at my television watching. I couldn't sit anymore. It was so riveting.
Well, now and the great thing with that at Silverstone was that Lewis had kind of had that slow start to the season. And where we were in the press box, I mean, the noise at Silverstone is always fantastic. And you could hear whenever he was passing somebody, the crowd was just going insane. And we don't get that commentary in the press box, but we got the three goes Hamilton kind of noise, without any commentary over it from like alongside us. So that was memorable. So yeah, actually, that's a good point. I think that and Brazil was good for a very different reason. It wasn't quite as crazy, but it was entertaining. And I think I've always thought a key to a great race is not knowing who's going to win with 5 laps left. Yeah. If there's any jeopardy left where you're like, I don't know who's going to win this race, it's usually been a pretty good one. And that's why sometimes, a race like Abu Dhabi, usually, unless there's a safety car here, the guy winning is going to win the race. So yeah, I'd forgotten that one Action of the Year yesterday, didn't it? Or yesterday as of the time of recording, that Silverstone.
Yeah.
Bit.
Yeah, and I think we talked about this last week that we felt the regs were a big win. Your cars could definitely follow closer, and we didn't get any of these kind of backing off laps for 3 or 4 laps where I need to let everything cool down and have the tyres come back to me, and then I can do another run at them. So, but it was almost a double-edged sword because, the new regs were fantastic, and we had some amazing races at the beginning. We had some kind of Charles on Max. It just promised the season that was going to be epic, and then because Red Bull just seemed to nail it, that combo of driver and car, those passes were being seen a lot more in the midfield, which was still great. Don't get me wrong, I'm a sucker for a good overtake, but now it's kind of, I don't know, it's Seb on someone or it's Fernando on someone. It's not the leaders doing it. So that was, for me, was I promised so much in the first few races, and then a combination of Ferrari pulling a Ferrari, and we'll get on to your thoughts on Binotto in a minute, but kind of, it was like the season that could have been, in a way.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And it's funny, isn't it? Because we had those wheel-to-wheel moments with Lewis and Max last year with cars that were meant to be worse for overtaking. But I think that just showed you just how close those two guys were. And you wonder what that fight could have been like in these cars. Because I feel like there would have been so many more moments when they would have probably had about 6 or 7 races like that last year in these cars. So there definitely was an improvement. The driver said you could follow closer. All of the sounds that you want to hear from drivers, engineers, was these cars are much better for this kind of thing. So that was good. And it did make the midfield fights it saved the F1 race director a lot, the TV race director a lot at the end of the season, because he's like, right, Max is 20 seconds ahead. But there's 8 battles here that, they're probably going to wheel to wheel, a bit better. So that's always, I think that's one thing F1 is kind of constantly battling with, is how do we make the battle for 7th in a race interesting, because I'm the same as you. I love seeing two drivers go wheel to wheel for it, but it is difficult to get a more casual fan into it when it's like, well, the top 3 positions are kind of settled, and it might not even be for points, or it might be for 1 point. But it seems like it's made the whole field much more open in terms of if you're coming up to another car and you're slightly ahead, you've got a slightly better advantage with tires, or you're on a better pit strategy than them, you don't have to wait for them to pit so much anymore. It's like, I can get this guy and overtake. And so yeah, I've liked them. They were really encouraging, and I think the sprint format as well has worked better with these cars as well, it seems. So that's been good.
We saw, I think it was 31% increase in overtakes year over year, 21 to 22. And I'm hopeful, I'm an optimist, that with the cost cap having time to settle in, that we'll see more level development, more even development, as opposed to the people who had all the money the years before the cost caps really came in, still riding on maybe some of that spend.
I think so.
Do you think do you think this will, kind of continue to even out, and we'll see maybe a little more parity at the top as well? Or
I think so. And one of the interesting things with the cost cap that kind of went under the radar this year a lot was, the cost cap itself didn't go under the radar. It very much was on the radar for especially in October. But when it came in, I think Ross Brawn and a few others said, like, look, this is going to take a few years to stabilize, because what you've got at the moment is you've got all the big teams are trying to work out, right, how do we spend within this? You've got a team like Haas who this year didn't spend anywhere close to the top, but now have a new title sponsor coming in, and they're like, right, we know now what we can spend. We know what is allowed in the regs, and what they can go to new sponsors and say, look, if you can give us X amount of money, X amount of backing, we can compete with Red Bull. Because the problem used to be back a few years ago, if you were a smaller team and you wanted backers to come in, you'd have to say to them, look, if we want to compete with Red Bull, you're probably gonna have to give us about $200 million a year, and we might not win races. And that's quite a difficult sales pitch. So I can't imagine having to do that. And one of the things, to use Haas as an example, we all remember the Rich Energy saga from the Netflix show, and I mean, I lived through that. I was there on that Silverstone weekend when he just disappeared and started tweeting pictures of the Haas as a milk float. But he was like, we're going to beat Red Bull on the track, and everyone was like, well, this guy's a bit deluded, because to do that, it's not just a case of money either. You need, and you can see what Aston Martin are doing. You need to build a new factory. You need to get a better wind tunnel. You need all of these things to do. I think you still need to do those things now. But in terms of upgrades and development of a car, the parity is much closer. So to bring in like a MoneyGram now, Haas will probably have turned to them and said, look, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that over 5-10 years, we can become a front-running team for much less money than that would have taken a while ago. So I think you're absolutely right. I think to actually see that, it's going to take a few seasons to play out, but we're already seeing it. I think over the next 2 seasons, the gap from the back to the front will hopefully trim down a lot, and that also means that you're probably going to have seasons where going from like 2nd to 5th and 5th to 3rd over the course of a year might be a bit more common. At the moment, if you look at Alpine and McLaren, have just been stuck in the midfield forever. The top 3 have been the top 3 for a while. I'm hoping that becomes less of a thing in a few seasons when everyone's kind of battling together, but we'll see.
It was interesting, right? The year started, and Alfa Romeo and Haas really came out hot. To your point on teams that maybe took a jump, and Rob and I debated this throughout the year, and he was right that it felt as though and I don't say that often, but it felt as though Alfa Romeo, really hit a wall at some point where their development just wasn't on par with others, and the points slowed down, reliability got bad, the Ferrari engine just kept. As one of our regular listeners calls it, an external combustion engine, and so
I like that. I might have to steal that next year.
That's no problem. There's a guy named JP. It was his.
Okay, well, yeah, give me his name and I'll credit him if I ever use that on a pod, because that's.
I mean, in Austria when Carlos pulled over, that's what it was. But anyway, it was they did fall off there for a bit, and both teams, and we would debate which one fell harder, and Rob was right. It was Alfa. However, obviously they got a little bit at the end of the year. The car kind of came back, and Valtteri was on fire and got them 6th place in the constructors. But it is interesting, right? You see the teams kind of going up and down in the midfield this year, and hopefully we start seeing that more. I guess overall, I have a question for you, Nate. We talked a little bit about this last time, and I'll just kind of play a clip here for you, a couple of them, and I'd like your thoughts about this. Is about, well, you'll see what it's about in a second here.
Wait,
There's
what are these tires?
Sorry, it's a mistake.
So you had things like that. You already mentioned the France.
Are you okay?
No!
I mean, we had repeated.
Question is, would you like to have a new medium to go through the traffic or prefer a new hard? Question.
I mean, long messages, and then at Silverstone, question we play, and then at Silverstone, don't forget they gave Carlos this behind the safety car, where they wanted him to back up to help Charles, and that was his win. So, like,
yeah, that's right.
With like, would you put Ferrari in the most surprising bucket this year, in the fact that this continued through the year, or in the most disappointing bucket? And it leads into Mattia here in a second, but I'm just curious your thoughts on the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a good argument for both those words to use. I would say disappointing, given where we came into the season thinking that's probably the car to beat, you know?
Yeah.
Certainly coming out of winter testing, Ferrari looked like the quickest car, but it also, weirdly, looked like the most reliable, didn't it? Because it got the most mileage in winter testing, went those first couple of races. Red Bull was the one having the issues. And you thought, oh, that's interesting. You know, Red Bull usually, you know, on the car side, you know, you expect them to have a certain level of reliability. And then, yeah, it's just like in the course of a couple of weeks, it just flipped around. And I mean, I think the most disappointing thing, and frustrating is a word I'd use as well, was those radio messages as the car, because I think that ultimately, and I'd love to know if you guys agree, I think ultimately Ferrari's still in a pretty good place in terms of its car's still pretty close to the front. You know, they're not as far off the front as they were in a few, you know, previous seasons. The most frustrating thing was clearly from a race management perspective and the way they operate over a weekend. They were just so far lacking behind Red Bull and Mercedes, you know, if you look at how they do things. And those radio messages, I mean, Charles Leclerc by the end of the season, it seemed in some of those races like he wanted to be anywhere else but driving for Ferrari. And can you imagine that being like, that should not be the case. It should be the other way around. You know, people are like, oh, like Leclerc's the envy of the grid because he drives for Ferrari. So I'd say disappointing. But yeah, those radio messages, like, they're the stuff of nightmares, aren't they? Just like the question. I mean, the question became, I shared a Destiny's Child meme at one point, you know, because there's that song where they keep going question. So I was like, it just reminded me of that by the end, and I thought it's pretty bad, and it is a good segue into Binotto, because obviously that's where you have to start making changes. Just quickly before we do that, what would you two both say about Ferrari? Disappointing or surprising?
It's near and dear to Rob's heart, so I'm gonna let him go first.
Just it was pure disappointment, absolutely disappointment. Because, and like you say, you try not to give the same way that you don't give too much credibility to, say, FP1 and FP2 too much. You try not to give too much credibility to winter testing, because who's kind of sandbagging, all that kind of good stuff. But the Ferrari fan in me can't help but get excited, because, like you say, it looked good. We hit the first race. Charles, not only did the livery look like sublime, it was a great looking car, a great performing car with a great driver in it. And this was
my favorite looking Ferrari for years, both in terms of design, like the actual car itself and the paint on it it looked great, and it was like the stars feel like they've aligned here for them. So yeah, I completely felt that too.
Yeah, I mean,
go on, Brian, you throw yours in. I know you're not as big a Ferrari fan.
Well,
as
so one of my favorite drivers as a fan on the grid is
Charles Chuck Leclerc.
And so I backed Chuck, and it was gut wrenching to watch that stuff happen. And and Rob knows this, I'm also a Carlos fan. So when he joined the team and broke up Carlando, I'm like, all right, I can get behind, you know, Carlos Lasines. And so, you know, we put this together, and I was watching it, and I really was hopeful. And I think it was Saudi Arabia, where you just saw that Ferrari was on fire, and you know, Charles and Max were brake testing each other for the DRS coming down the line, and I'm like,
neither of them wanted to go into the final corner in the lead, did they?
Right,
that's right, yeah.
And
so they're like literally right. There was one where they both locked up next to each other for no reason, just to not go across the detection zone first. And so, yeah, I mean, like I was so excited, and then the number of times that they would be the only team on the hard tires that were bricks. The number of times that they would leave somebody out, like Monaco. The number of times that they would have at the end, Brazil, like am I the only one on Inters? Question. Yes, you are. Question.
I think Brazil was. I mean, there was lots of disappointments for this season, but that was such a big mistake, and it just felt like it was like the season's culminate. Like, didn't culminate in that moment, but it felt like if you were to sum up the season in a mistake, it was that one, because Pole was there for the taking. Maybe on race pace, maybe they wouldn't have beaten Mercedes, but you got to give yourself the chance to beat them. You know,
Ferrari had the 6th worst pole to win ratio in the history of F1, And it was
I'm actually looking at that now. Like you see, if you look at the poll list, there's a lot of Charles there. And then you look at the fastest lap even early in the year, Charles got a fair few of those points, Sainz got a few. Then winning driver, you get Charles, Max, Charles. And then you have to scroll down, you get Carlos and Charles back to back, Britain and Austria, and then never again. Yeah. So if you took 2 clumps of 2 or 3 races, Ferrari were great. You take those out, and they weren't anywhere close to being good enough.
Which kind of brings us round to the Binotto thing. Now, I did listen to your latest episode of the Paddock this week, and you were talking about kind of Binotto versus Toto. Now, 2 things came to me then. One is kind of, some people are saying it's harsh that Binotto carries the can for this. I think you were kind of saying, well, hang on, that's never going to happen on Toto's watch, because even if a bunch of fools come to him saying we should put Charles out on Inters, he's not going to let that ride, because the buck stops with him. So that was, I thought that was a pretty good insight. The second thing was, I think it was your impression of Toto is absolutely legendary. I don't know if you can give us a Toto now or not, whether you don't do it on demand, but that was fantastic.
No, it did. I do it occasionally in the press box, and so it just came out during the last episode. I'll happily do it. I'll give some context as well, but I'll do both. I'll answer the first point, and then I'll do the Toto impression.
Okay.
So yeah, I think that accountability is a big thing, and I think one of the things I said on that episode as well was that what Mercedes did, especially when they were dominating, was even if they had big mistakes where they clearly had effed up their strategy, the following race they'd come back and they'd say, "Here's a list of 6 things we've done behind the scenes to sort out our pit-to-car communication. Here's how we're going to make pit stops better. Here's how we're going to do all these things." So every time they made a mistake, you almost felt like, they've actually got better as a result of this. And that's one of the things that I don't think got enough credit when Mercedes was winning, was that it's all well and good saying, they've got the best car, they had the best driver, which was both true, but they were able to make pretty big mistakes. I mean, you can go through pretty much every season that Mercedes dominated. There'd be a big mistake, something pretty embarrassing, and they'd come back and they'd be better from it. And that's why I thought it was funny that Binotto was like, no one talks about Mercedes' errors. It's like, well, we do. And also, your errors are so much worse because you don't seem to actually ever fix them. You never seem to
do them again the next weekend.
Yeah, they get worse the following race. So I think for that point, Binotto had to go. But I think on the Paddock, both Chris and Lawrence said it's probably not just him. And I agree with that as well. It's kind of like the FIA getting rid of Michael Massey. It's like, yeah, that's probably the start of the problem, but maybe there's issues beneath that. And so the Toto impression came from, we would always hear on those weekends when Mercedes would mess up. His quotes would always be the most depressing quotes you've ever heard. You'd be like, well, today, this is the darkest day in the history of Mercedes. And you're like, dude, you finished 3rd today. Like, it's okay. But, and he'd be like, yeah, we are at the pit of a well. And he always comes up with really great quotes that have really just invoke the most, like, horrific doom.
Yeah, he really does.
And then the following day they'd win, and he's like, we have scaled Everest today, and it's like, I mean, yeah, okay, I guess he did, but you might have just had a bad day and then a good day. But the point that was coming out of those quotes was that always he would take failure so seriously, and I just don't think Ferrari were taking failure as seriously as they should have been, because. Yeah, and you've only got to watch something like The Last Dance to know that Michael Jordan probably made more mistakes than any sportsman in history when it came to playing sport on the court, or at least he felt he did, because he was driven. He wasn't driven by his successes. He was driven by all the things he did badly. He would say, "I need to become a better player and do this better, do this better, do this better." So Binotto, yeah, I just think he didn't seem to take. He didn't. I don't think he, through the season, took the responsibility of those failures properly. And he was doing quite a lot. He was still kind of in charge of the car development and leading the team. So Ferrari probably had themselves to blame for that as well. He needed more help, clearly. But yeah, I think Binotto going, I mean, I don't think there's any way you can defend it. And sadly, I don't have a good Binotto impression. Otherwise, I'd have done them like a dueling
Nate, I gotta say
impressions or something. But yeah, that's my take on it. And it's a shame as well, because Binotto's a great Ferrari company man. He's obviously been there a long time, and he shouldn't just be judged by this one year, because he's obviously been there a long time, and they've built a good car. Like I said, they're still in a good position, so he deserves some credit for that. But you can't have that season and not have someone take the fall. So
First of all, I got to say it's an amazing point on learning from failure and the way you framed that. It's not often that something that comes out of someone besides my voice on the dirty side makes a lot of sense. It's never actually Rob's. But we've had some guests who have had some good ones. But I remember, what was it, 2020 Bahrain with Sakir, the short, with George, and the double stack with Valtteri. And within a day, we'd learned, well, when they were talking to the garage, only one could come through at a time, and they talked about how they're going to fix the radio and they're going to work on these things. They, to your point, I hadn't even thought of it, but they literally would do like an after-action review. How do we get better and learn from it? And you never felt that way with Ferrari, because the number of times Carlos would rock up at a pit stop with 3 tires, I mean, it just kept happening.
And it's a cultural thing as well, because I think one of the things Toto's instilled is he's like, it's fine for us to talk about mistakes, and if you make a mistake, I'm going to call you out for it. But if he makes one, he's happy to say, this mistake's on me. When the car wasn't in the right place this year, Wolf was like, as a team, we haven't done this well. We need to do better. Whereas, those pit stops would happen for Charles, and it's like, okay, it's not saying we should all blame the guy on the front left jack for not having the wheel, but clearly that process hasn't worked for some reason, and we never really knew. And Ferrari did get better through the season of kind of telling us this went wrong or this went wrong, but you felt like they were almost annoyed we were asking them, like, why has this happened? And it's like, well, that's kind of your job to answer those questions. So it is interesting. And Red Bull are also pretty good with, they work in a different way, I think, but they're also quite good at, if they make a mistake, like, we know why this happened now and we're not going to do it again.
Yeah, although I would say Horner is more like, if I go over to football, English football, that is. Different managers.
Yeah, it's still, and just a side note, it's still officially football for 4 more years with the USA out of the World Cup.
That's true.
I think if they ever win it, then it can become soccer.
Wait, is the World Cup?
I didn't. Yeah, sorry, Rob.
Is it still going?
Off there, mate.
Yes, it's still going, even though you're out. It doesn't stop just because the US are out.
Oh, I hadn't heard anything about it in a couple of days. I figured it out. I didn't.
Yeah, but no, sorry, Rob. Go on.
Anyway, what I was going to say is different managers would become renowned for different ways they would deal with defeat when they're in front of the cameras, right? And lots of different things. And one of them was Jose Mourinho, which was he was brilliant at deflecting the journalists' attention to other things. So if Chelsea had played like absolute garbage that day, he would have an amazing way of coming out and just distracting stuff and saying squirrel and send the journalists off on this. He'd either say something crazy or inflammatory, but he'd say something that had nothing to do with the game that had just gone on. He was very good at defending kind of the team that way. And I find Horner's a little bit like that. He's very good at deflecting. He will either acknowledge a little bit of an error, but very quickly, we made a small error, but look at all those things going on over there. That's what you should be looking at. And he's very much reminds me of the way Mourinho used to do that as well.
Yeah, me too. The Mourinho one's a really good comparison. I've often said it's kind of the us versus the world mentality in the team. And look, fair play. Like, I think for Red Bull it works, but Mercedes doesn't quite have that. They have more of like, we want to be the best team, and it's less of that kind of their siege mentality. And that's kind of why Wolf Horner is fascinating itself, because they're both quite different in how they lead the teams. And I would argue that both of them are pretty damn good at what they do. In getting the same results out of their teams, but in quite different ways.
Yeah, look, we broke the cost cap, but someone leaked it. That's the big problem here. Let's talk about the leak. No, let's talk about the fact that you broke it. And then, our Max won't swap places, and you've got, Checo out there on the radio like this.
Yeah, it shows who he really is.
And then they put out a statement that's completely made up and fake, and a day later, and think they've gone past it.
Yeah, and, those things were frustrating, because one of the things that Red Bull often will level at some people in the media will be, oh, you're just out to get us. And really, maybe some media does have, an agenda or whatever. But like, I always say to people, Abu Dhabi last year, I went into that race I was like, if I had to pick who's going to win, who I'd want to win, I was like, I'd want Max to win. Because I was like, had a great season. What a story. He comes in and beats a 7-time world champion his first season. And I thought, it probably means Lewis is more likely to stay around. So I wasn't rooting. I've never rooted for one driver over another in a race. But I think a lot of fans just assume and I think Red Bull have helped to fuel this in a way. Like, a lot of fans think of Red Bull think, all these journalists just want Mercedes and Lewis to win. And it's like, that's not really the case, but it's an effective thing to throw at the media if reports are coming out, against your team. And yeah, the leak, that was always very interesting. The cost cap, it was like, it's been leaked. How does Toto know? And ultimately at the end of it, it was like, well, you've still overspent. And I think that the punishment actually was pretty fair when you look at the amount of the overspend versus what they actually got.
Talking of things that were fair or not fair, then this is an amazing segue, by the way. Just kind of looking at like a time check here, things that were maybe not fair when we start looking at drivers that we lost this year, right? So Mick, I want your input on this.
Oh boy,
yeah, I know, I know, I'm a Mick fan, and I have clouded judgment.
You are such a fanboy.
I think we might disagree on this then, Rob. If you're a big fan,
Mick, harsh or inevitable?
I think inevitable. And look, my view on Mick is I really like Mick to deal with his, he himself, really nice guy, and impossible not to root for the guy, being son of, the driver that for me is probably the reason I cover Formula One, and the reason I loved it growing up was his dad. But what I say to people is, if you look at his results this season, and you said to someone that's a driver called Mick Fisher or Mick Schmidt or Mick Anderson, they'd say he's probably not good enough to stay in Formula One. You suddenly say that's Mick Schumacher, son of Michael, and I think suddenly you're like, oh well, yeah, maybe he should stay in. I don't know. He had a good car at the start of the season, didn't make the most of it. Yeah, I think it's a shame, but inevitable that he got dropped, because if you're Haas, you look at the points that were probably left on the table this year, it probably cost them a position in the Constructors' Championship, and it's a results business. So okay, I would say inevitable.
I mean, I'll take that. However, let me counter it with, if we have to accept that Mick had to go, was Hulkenberg the right guy to bring in?
Oh, that's a fair question, because it was quite uninspiring as a choice. But I can see it as well. Like, I've clashed with Nico in press sessions before. Ooh. So from my point of view, I was like, oh man, like that'll be interesting now. I mean, we're both older than when that happened the first time. But I can kind of see it from Gunther Steiner's position. It's like, you've got a guy who's probably pretty fast, reliable. I'm not sure how they'll deal with the Magnussen-Hulkenberg dynamic. Not purely because of that comment from a few years ago, but whenever you have two quite competitive drivers, I think inevitably suddenly you have to manage them. So Haas have almost replaced the issue of one driver isn't experienced enough and he keeps crashing with the issue of our drivers are both very experienced and now they're almost magnetically together on track all the time. How do we manage it? So the idea that one is better than the other, it depends on how they manage that situation. But yeah, I think the biggest issue for them was that they called Danny Rick, and he really, by the sounds of it, he never even returned the calls of Gunther Steiner, which I think the team were kind of a bit miffed about. And then, as they started talking to Hulkenberg, Danny Rick's performances didn't really suggest to them like, oh, this is the guy we should actually take. So it'll be interesting. And Hulkenberg, I think most people were like, like really? Hulk for Mick?
Yeah.
I think that was maybe made the Mick argument a bit easier. I'll give you that. That side.
So, Nate, was this you then with Nico?
Once again, most unsportive driver of the grid. Yeah.
I mean,
sounds like Nate.
I'm a believer that never goes away. They both said it went away, and so a sort of separate question from that though: how much of on-track outbursts? People always say, "Oh, they're in the heat of the moment." I agree, they're in the heat of the moment. And you may say something occasionally about a guy blocking you, and you may get mad. But like when Fernando said this after Spa, what an idiot! I mean, in my mind, I feel like there's something behind that. It's like, it came out, right? The heat of the moment doesn't create the thought; it comes out. Is my point. And I'd be curious your thoughts when this kind of stuff happens. How much of it is you make something up because it's the heat of the moment, and it doesn't matter. Your best friend could be out there, and you call him an idiot, or is it the real feeling you have underneath came out? Is it like, which part is it when these people are in the quote heat of the moment?
That's a great question. I think I definitely think it's a bit like, I can't remember the quote exactly, but it's like behind every drunken truth, or no, behind every sober truth there's a drunken lie, or maybe the other way around. Like the idea that when you have a few beers, I've completely mashed that phrase up. It's definitely the opposite of what I said. But basically, you've had a few to drink and then the truth comes out, right. You're a bit free with what you say. And I kind of agree, especially with a guy like Alonso. Some of the stuff he says is very mischievous, and I feel like it's him turned up to, you go past 10, you turn all of them way up to 15, 16. And yeah, Alonso definitely, I mean, some of the stuff he says about Lewis, he says stuff that he wouldn't he doesn't say about other drivers. And then the thing with Alonso that's frustrating is he then gets out of the car and goes, no, the media's all taken out of context. You guys are... And so, like you said, Brian, like you said it. And he then... The Brazil one was really interesting because it's now kind of turned out from what Ocon has said. Like, well, Fernando came out and said, oh, we've talked about it behind the scenes, it's fine. And Ocon said, no, we didn't. We didn't have that conversation. That didn't happen. So I think drivers are okay with other drivers or teammates slagging them off on the radio, but it's kind of how they follow up with that afterwards, if they clear the air or not. And some drivers are good at that. You know, I forget the race this year, but I think Ricciardo went to the Ferrari hospitality at one race this year. I think he had an issue with science. He just went straight there and was like, look, mate, I'm sorry, that was all me. And Carlos afterwards was like, when I came out of the car, I was pissed. But he came and spoke to me, and I was like, you know what, fair enough. Like, we can't change it. He manned up and he took the blame. So I think sometimes it does linger. The interesting one on the Hulkenberg front, which was funny, was that when they met in Abu Dhabi, I think knowing the two of them were going to be teammates, apparently Hulkenberg went up to Magnussen and he joked. He looked at him and said, suck my balls to him, recounting that quote from 2017. So I feel like they're probably past that issue. I'd be worried if two grown men were still holding that grudge.
You think?
But when it's more recent, I think so. Like Alonso Hamilton, you got the impression the first time in Belgium when Alonso said that quote, he's never learned how to fight for position. Hamilton was like, oh, okay, and then he gave him that hat, didn't he? But then a couple of races later, not in the heat of the moment, Fernando Alonso told the Dutch press like, I don't really value Lewis's championships. And Lewis, by that point, you could tell was like, okay, well, seems like you've got a bit of an agenda here against me.
Right, exactly.
So I think if it's the more recent it is, the harder it is for people to move past it. But it's a really good question. Some drivers still remember, quotes that other drivers have said from way, way down the line, and you're like, I don't even remember that being said. But they, it's in their head. They've remembered it. So
the Dirty Side did an investigation, and we found that at least we've predicted 40% of the teams next year will have some driver strife, and of those,
it's a good prediction.
I mean, if it's pretty, let's be inter-team. So like, Max and Checo. We'll just ask you quickly. Are they over it or not over it?
Definitely not over it. I don't think Checo's ever going to be over that.
Agreed.
Because the thing is, it was for 6th position. It was so petty in the grand scheme of things. So if you're Checo, you're like, how can I... Even whatever they said behind the scenes, he can't be over it, surely.
All right, so then if we move to Alpine, we have Pierre and Esteban. We've seen Esteban be spicy with a teammate already, and we've heard that this all-French team doesn't get along, and I've seen tweets where they crop each other out in the past. Are they buddies or not going to be buddies at Alpine next year?
I don't think that they're... I don't think they've... It's a bit of both. I think they've definitely overcome whatever the issue was before, but I think that's going to be one of the spiciest next year, because the other thing that's clear from their interviews is that the one thing that used to motivate them growing up was beating the other guy, especially the other guy, because of how good they both were. So, yeah, I think that's going to be a really interesting one. And yeah, like you said, Ocon's not blameless in that Alonso situation.
No.
Like him with Perez, him with Alonso, like he was good at antagonizing his teammates. So I think that's going to be really, really, really spicy.
Speaking of Alonso, the third of 10 teams where we're going to have drama, I predict, will actually be now at Aston Martin with Fernando and Lance. Fernando seems to leave teams on fire, and he said, you remember when he helped in Hungary and Esteban said, his reputation's wrong. Well, look what happened a year later. And so now he's driving with the owner's son. They came together famously at the US GP when Lance was meandering around the track trying to block him.
Yeah.
How long until we have Lance and Fernando at each other's throats?
Well, that's, I think, for me, is one of the really fascinating storylines going into next season. For those exact reasons you mentioned, Alonso, one of the things he likes to do is to have little digs at his teammates over. If you read his quotes, it's like, well, I've been better than my teammate this year. I've outqualified my teammate this year. My car's been the least reliable. He does these little things.
Right.
He did it with Stoffel Vandoorne. Like he savaged him for that year they were teammates together. Yeah. I'm talking on track as well, but also when he was talking to the media. But yeah, the guy paying his bills now, the guy who's paying his wages, is the dad of that guy. So I think that's going to be fascinating. And what I found interesting with Austin was that Alonso, if that had been any other driver, Alonso would have been apoplectic with like fury in the press box, but you knew as soon as he knew it was Stroll, he was like, well, I think he just probably didn't see me there. And it's like, dude, come on. Like, there's no way you're fine with that. So
your car had liftoff. You were in the air.
Yeah, like that could have been really nasty. I would have, most drivers would have been livid. So I think that was an interesting insight into how that might be. But I just don't think Alonso has it in him to be politically neutral for 23 races. I think at some point he'll say something, and then he'll have to go face Lawrence Stroll and say, yeah, I did say that. And I don't know, maybe he won't double down on it. Who knows? But yeah, that's going to be great. I think that's two characters. I mean, Stroll's, I don't think many people think Stroll is going to beat Alonso on track, but as a personality, I can see the two of them together maybe clashing as well, like beyond the dad stuff as well. So.
Well, as we seem to have meandered into 2023, which is a great move, because that's where we want to head on this show. New drivers for next year. So Piastri, Sargent, and De Vries. Where's the Nate Saunders money on drive?
And Hulkenberg.
No, he's not new. I'm not counting him as new.
Yeah,
three new drivers. Who's going to make the biggest impact next season?
I think it'll be Piastri. Just honestly, given the car he's going to be driving, he's probably going to have the most chance to make some kind of consequential results. But also, he's probably going to have the most impact because given that he's replacing Danny Rick, given the fact he's going to midfield team, I think he could have a really bad season. If Lando really shows him up with the way McLaren got him, I think there'll be even more spotlight on him. But the car's there, he should be in the points a lot of the races. Sargent is probably going to be at the back of the field a lot, just purely because he's in a car that's at that position.
Yeah.
And I think Albon should feel pretty confident beating him in the first season. And then De Vries is the interesting one. I just really don't know. Like, everyone who's worked with De Vries has said he's really quick, really talented. But again, the AlphaTauri was kind of, for me, one of the really disappointing stories of the season, because there'd been, kind of lower midfield, and then suddenly just dropped down to being, I think they finished 9th, didn't they?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think just purely based on the environment he's going into, I think I would say Piastri. And I'm excited to see all three of those guys for very different reasons.
I'm excited to have, and this is why I kind of hope he doesn't suck as badly as unfortunately the car he's got is probably going to mean he does. Is Sargent, because I think. The US now getting a third race next year, and finally having a US team in there in Haas, now finally getting a driver in there to kind of wave the stars and stripes. I just think that'll be a big shift for Formula One in the US, and having like a guy to cheer for. But unfortunately, also knowing, having lived here for 6 years now, the US also likes a winner, and I'm not quite sure that he's going to really be enough. So I hope he doesn't suck. I hope he maybe can get like a couple of points finishes, or bring that car around and show that he's an upgrade on Latifi.
I think that's, to be honest with Sargent, that's where he's, I think, in a good position, because the expectations, I don't mean this in a bad way, but the expectations are pretty low there for him going into next season, because I think for that exact reason, the car's not going to be great. Latifi didn't really set a high benchmark, and I think that Williams were keen to get him in. There was this fear, like, is it a year too early? But with Sargent, I think they're like, look, let's give him a year. Let's just get him into Formula One, get him adjusted. It's obviously great from their sponsorship point of view to have an American in there, and I hope so. But at the same time, and this will be a little dig to the US men's national team, because I just couldn't help myself. But even if he's just above average, they can all pretend, like with Pulisic, that he's the best driver in the world. Like, look, I like Christian Pulisic, but like, it's funny when there's a World Cup on, suddenly he's like Pele, and it's like he's good, he's good, but like, So I hope that doesn't happen with Sargent as well, where like there's almost a rush to proclaim that he's better than he might be, because ultimately the only person that hurts really would be him in the long run. So
as long as he stays on the racing track instead of maybe making a wrong turn in Japan and getting lost, I think then he'll be all right.
Yeah, I think it'll be good as well. And I've spoken to Logan a few times, and it'll be interesting. I'm looking forward to building that relationship from a journalistic point of view. But I think people will like him. I think he's like a lot of these younger drivers we get through. He's not one who's going to come out and immediately say crazy things to the media, but I think he's gonna, we'll see more of his personality as it kind of comes out. So that'll be fun as well.
Yeah, agree. I'm looking forward to that. So, I think time's going to be against us soon. So I just want to pick your brains over a couple of last things as we look forward to next year. So number one, we've kind of just mentioned it, Vegas. Are you going? And regardless whether you are, okay, you're going, what kind of race do you think it's going to give us based on the upside-down pig-shaped track?
Yeah, I mean, I've got to be honest, it's one of the first times that I've ever thought about a race in future and had to tell myself, like, the race itself might be pretty bad. The actual final event might be pretty bad. And I really hope that's not the case. I really hope it's a really great first event. But the thing that's fascinating with Vegas, and the thing that kind of I'm on the fence about whether I like it or not, is that I don't think Formula One really cares if it's a great race or not. I don't think that they didn't go to Vegas to be like, let's make the greatest race in the world in terms of a Sunday, a Saturday evening, as it turns out. I think they've looked at it from the Indy 500 point of view of, let's make a big event, let's make a big spectacle that is going to be on TV. But then, unlike the Indy 500, I don't think the actual racing is going to captivate people in the same way an Indy 500 might, or like a Brazil or a Silverstone might, in the same way. So I think the event itself is going to be crazy. I can't even imagine what that's going to be like. But I'm just worried fans are going to be disappointed with the final product. And there's some tickets going around, isn't there, that are like $800, and you're not even guaranteed to see the racetrack, which I think is crazy.
They're selling packages for $1 million now. There's $1 million package. Do you get a car with that? I mean,
I hope you get something. Maybe you get to do FP1 for one of the teams. I don't know.
Should.
Yeah, maybe you can. Yeah, you replace Lewis for the day so he can have the morning off or something. So yeah, it's I think it'll be a great spectacle, no doubt. But the Vegas is actually one that I think over time, the aura of that first race will wear off, after the first race pretty quickly. So then it becomes a question of, okay, is the event good enough and big enough and iconic enough to stay on like that? Because people are already pretty fed up with Monaco. As great as Monaco is, a lot of newer fans especially are like, well, what's the point in this race? Because the race that I tune into is pretty naff. It doesn't matter if people are on yachts and that people who are there are enjoying it. People who are watching it have taken time out of their day to watch it. So, well, this is pretty poor. So I think that will still be the same case for
it'll
Vegas.
live on with the
Vegas, baby, Vegas!
for at least a year or two, and then it has to deliver. But we'd be remiss if we didn't focus on the real reason you joined us again, Nate. It's the 100 Seconds of DRS. It is
I'm
the highlight, I would assume, of your day, week, maybe the month.
Yeah, this is what I'm going to be talking about for the rest of the week. So and I have no idea what's coming either. So, let's
set your expectations low.
Especially since Rob will be asking the questions. So, Nate, are you ready to close out the 100 Seconds of DRS?
Yeah,
Rob, are you ready to ask the questions?
Yes, I am.
All right, then I will start the timer, and the countdown is 3, 2, 1, begin.
What's your favorite Formula One track?
Track, I would say Spa.
What's the first poster you had on your bedroom wall?
I had a Michael Schumacher Benetton poster, and then I had a woman up there for a bit. But yeah, it was a car before a woman, which is embarrassing.
Best racing movie of all time?
Rush.
Mario or Luigi?
Mario.
Yes.
Favorite livery on an F1 car of all time?
Oh, that's a great question. Favorite livery, thinking quickly. I love the Mansell IndyCar from '93. That's one of the nicest. But if it's Formula One, 2002 Ferrari that Michael won in.
Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Best Formula One driver of all time?
Schumi.
What's your favorite cheese?
Red Leicester, or Red Leicester, I should say, for our American listeners.
DRS, good thing or bad thing?
Bad thing now, I would say. Difficult to say. Can I use like a sit on the fence card there? Like,
go on, you can sit on the fence. Would you rather be chased by one horse-sized duck or 10 duck-sized horses?
What? I think the duck-sized horses still, because you could at least get to high ground, and then you'd be okay.
Which two drivers from different eras would you love to see race head-to-head?
Hamilton, Senna.
Oh yeah.
If you could swap the cars out for another form of transportation, what would you like to see them racing in?
I quite would like the pods from Phantom Menace, pod racing, to have them all going around Tatooine, but like that, I think would be amazing.
And we're at time. That is the 100
I didn't know
seconds.
whether it had to be real life.
No, it could be anything. It's all good.
Cool. That's good. I enjoyed that.
Oh, there we are, you see? And it'll be even better when we put the music behind it as well. I mean, it literally is the best thing on any podcast on the planet. I almost said podcast again.
You did.
Brian.
Now it's in your brain. Rob, on our 50th, Rob tried to do my introduction, and he tried to put a little Chicago accent in it, and it came out horrible. But anyway,
brilliant.
Nate, thanks for joining us, man. This was
Hey, guys,
tremendous.
thanks so much for having me. I enjoyed it. And sorry if I was rambling on, but the Bonotto question just got me, and I was like, I've just got to start rambling now. So.
No, it was great. Having you here was just amazing, and we are super appreciative you made the time for us again.
No worries, man. Happy to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nate.
That was amazing, Nate. Thank you again so much for joining us. That was a lot of fun.
I'm loving the Toto impression.
That's so good. So very good. And that was a great conversation, and I laughed a bunch. And Nate, you're always welcome back. And just so you know, we may be America's leading Formula One podcast, but we already have a British voice. I'd be happy to replace Rob with you.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, just saying. You've often talked about replacing me. Now it's my turn.
Well, I'm going to take my guess. I'm going to go and start my own podcast.
That's fine. What are you going to call it? In the Marbles?
Yeah. So no, I'll call it the reverse sprint grid. Anyway, so that's that. That puts a bow around another episode. Next week, Brian is selfishly going on international business travel, so I'm going to pull together something. We think right now it might be a little bit of a nostalgic look at the first year on the dirty side of the track, because next week's episode will basically mark the 1 year anniversary since us two bozos got together on our bar stools and started talking rubbish or garbage about F1. So we may do a Vale's Tales, but the subject of the Vale's Tales will be self-indulgently ourselves.
We got to get the hazelnuts in there.
We'll find time to discuss that highbrow subject.
Yes. As always, we appreciate everybody listening. And since Nate was such a good sport, if anyone's interested in tackling the 100 Seconds of DRS, as we said, let us know at F1 Dirty Side on Twitter. Send us a tweet or a DM. We'd love to have you guys on, of course. So looking forward to next week. One last time to say thanks to Nate. Always welcome. And I can't wait to look back on the first year with you, Rob.
Yeah, and I think actually it will bring a curtain down on season 1 of The Dirty Side. Because every time I upload the episodes, it asks me to mark the season and the episode number. And I've just kept that as a 1 all the way through. But I think it'll be fitting that next week, last show of the year before we go off on kind of holiday, Christmas break, we will end season 1 and we'll be back in the new year for season 2.
Sounds great. And with that, everybody, thank you again for listening. Be well. Have a great week.